Hello, my name is Amari, and for this review, we're talking about the Betty Boop musical, which I believe is captioned as Boop the Musical. Now, to summarize the way this musical works, it's what happens is Betty Boop, more than likely in the 1930s, which is when she was the most popular, is doing what she usually does. The musical opens with a song and dance number, and after that, Betty is interviewed and she's questioned, who is she? She's played president, war hero, all these different type of characters, but who is Betty Boop is something that kind of stuns her. And even though it's not necessarily fully clear, but play the musical starts in the animated world. So when she goes to Grampy, who's in, but nobody else really outside of Pudgy, she talks to him, vents about wanting to not necessarily be as famous, wanted to know who she is and stuff like that. And he introduces one of his inventions, which would allow her to go to the real world. And in Betty's mind, in the real world, nobody would know her. So what she decides to do is sing Grampy a lullaby, take herself to the real world, and the hope was that she can reinvent herself, learn who she is, and things of that nature. That isn't the case. She gets transported to 2023 New York Comic Con, and while she's lucky that people there just think she's doing a Betty Boop cosplay, unfortunately, she doesn't get that nominee that she was hoping for because she's still very popular. And one person who becomes, well, Trisha's a child, so I don't know if a grown woman like Betty Boop could be best friends with her child, but basically, what happens is Trisha, who's a big Betty Boop fan, she befriends Betty, even takes her home, which even for New York, that sounds a bit weird. And those two bond, and Betty even gets a crush on what is either Trisha's brother or just her babysitter, whose name is Dwayne. And as Betty spends days, maybe a week or so in New York, she doesn't necessarily get to pursue discovering who she is, but she does get a break from all that's happening out in the animated world. But because the animated world is built around Betty, her disappearance is starting to lead to things falling apart. So Grampy decides to use his machine to go get her back. And on the way, he makes a little bit of a detour to reconnect with a woman named Valentina, who he hasn't seen since he's been in the real world 40 years ago. And pretty much the musical is just about Grampy eventually finding Betty to convince her to come back, and Betty not necessarily exploring New York, but definitely getting to know Trisha, getting to know Dwayne, and also interacting with a mayor-elect who decides that Betty could be so great for his flailing campaign. So, getting to the review section, top highlight for me is just the pudgy puppeteer, and that's because throughout all the plays and musicals I've seen, there hasn't been a puppeteer. So just getting that kind of sets the vibe of this being kind of an old school type of musical in terms of, having puppeteers, which you don't really see. There's a lot of tap dancing, especially with the opening number, and it just reminds you that Betty Boop is from a different time. So it becomes less about, hey, we're going to use this name but not bring any of the culture along, and instead it's like, we're going to remind you that Betty Boop was from the jazz era, that tap dancing, puppets, maybe a taste of vaudeville and stuff like that vibe, that aesthetic is going to come with her to the modern times, if not be part of the musical as a whole. And to add on to that, I would say, while the musical is not going to make you laugh to the point of feeling like you have bronchitis, it is very much comical, especially because of the way Jasmine Amy Rogers, who plays Betty Boop, knows how to tap into that sort of old school cartoon beat, especially when it comes to noting how things are different between her time in the 30s, especially in the black and white animated world, to the colorful world, which is 2023. Colorful, you can take it as you will. And it's not like the most hilarious things you ever heard, but between her interactions with Trisha, her interactions with Dwayne, and especially Trisha's aunt's employer who's running for mayor, there are a lot of moments which even remembering to kind of get a little chuckle, but again, it's not going to be like, oh my god, funniest thing ever. And I should know, if you decide you want to take kids to this, yes, there are some bits of innuendo, a little bit, but nothing that's going to be like, oh my god, cover your eyes, cover your ears. It's more so the type of stuff that goes over kids' heads and is a little small treat for adults who took them to see this. Next highlight is going to be Angelica Hale, and the main reason we're noting her separately, even naming her the actor instead of naming the character, is because I feel like with a lot of productions, whether it's movies, TV shows, musical plays, the kid often is just relegated to being proof that somebody had sex at one time, or else it's just there to intensify the drama because, there's a kid involved. But I would say with the way that Angelica Hale plays Trisha, she's actually treated as a valued character and not a supporting one for somebody else. Because one of the things Trisha's dealing with is, with her parents dying and her kind of latching on Betty Boop to be her role model, she kind of needs to, in her coming of age story, I guess you can say, become her own hero, become her own version of Betty Boop. And alongside that, she provides the type of energy that I wouldn't say that the actress who plays Betty Boop doesn't necessarily give. She brings all the energy you can, but there's something about the way Angelica Hale performs that just puts things a little bit higher, even though she doesn't get as much musical numbers, dance numbers, but I would say in terms of what this musical offers, of course Betty Boop is the hook, but I would submit that Angelica Hale is a welcome surprise alongside that hook. Which leads to the last highlight, which is just how the background gets animated sometimes, because a lot of these theaters, they have moving parts where, you'll see a couch or something get pushed on, or in the case of, I believe, stage 2 in New York, there's like a circular in the middle of the stage so they can move stuff around. But what this production does is it takes things a little bit further, and again, it taps into who Betty Boop is rather than just use the name for nostalgia and also to get you to pay $180 whatever dollars. So it uses those old-timey cartoons to kind of accentuate what's happening, whether it's showing off Grampy's inventions, whether it's having it where Betty has to hit somebody, you can see stars come out from around the person, or to prove a point when Betty's singing, when it comes to special moments, she has it where there's a little dancing ball and that's doing the lyrics while she sings. And granted, it would have been nice to know ahead of time that was going to happen, or at least maybe have that be advertised so maybe the audience can sing along. But at the same time, nobody came to hear the person next to you sing, so maybe that's not the best idea. But the point of the matter is, again, what I appreciate about Boop the Musical is they understand that it's not just about bringing the iconic name, but you have to bring in the culture. You have to make it so it's not just weak, cheap nostalgia. You gotta bring all that Betty Boop is and what she had back in the day to modern times and makes it so that it mixes well. And I think they really executed that. But with that said, I have to admit, I was a bit disappointed by the fact that Coco the Clown, Fearless Fred, Bimbo, and pretty much most of the notable faces outside of Grampy and Pudgy, they don't exist. You don't see them in a small cameo when Betty Boop is at Comic-Con. She mentions as a bit of a running gag that she used to be a dog, so you kind of get an idea that, Bimbo can potentially exist, but you don't see them whatsoever. And then perhaps what kind of annoyed me a little bit is that Coco the Clown, when it comes to how the stage looks before the show starts, you see him in part of the display, yet you don't see him even when Betty's back in the animated world doing a talkie. And I get that they're not going to bring everybody to present day, especially since Fearless Fred, I think, was Betty's boyfriend at one time, so that could complicate things. But even just in the Comic-Con moment when we were seeing a bunch of Disney characters or Pikachu or Goku, it would have been nice to see Coco the Clown walk by, or Bimbo, or somebody dressed up as them. I mean, even in case of In one of the scenes, they show the people in New York who walk around and take pictures and maybe hassle you for some money afterwards. They could have had a Coco the Clown person. They could have had a bimbo. But, it's a missed opportunity. Which leads to our last on the fence topic, and that's Valentina. Valentina, to my understanding, is a brand new character, not part of the Betty Boop history, and she's made to be Grampy's love interest. Grampy did not need a love interest whatsoever. And while they do make it so that Valentina is a well-accomplished astrophysicist, she used to work for NASA and things like that, because Grampy is so obtuse when it comes to dating and romance, there's no chemistry between him and Valentina. So the more you see them interact, the more time they take away from Betty's story, or even Grampy interacting with the modern world and all that him and Pudgy and their little adventures could have been. It just feels like wasted time. And mind you, this is not saying anything bad about the actress. She did what she had to do based off of the script she was given, and it's a job, so she got bills to pay. But they could have cut that whole character, and it would have probably have led to either just a shorter musical, or they could have filled that time in with things that could have definitely either allowed for familiar characters, or if not familiar characters, maybe at least gave us more when it came to Betty's journey, since I feel like more could have been done with that. But overall, when it comes to Boop the Musical, it's definitely something that I found entertaining, and I would even say it's entertaining enough where I hope in the future it gets adapted to the big screen, because it does have that type of vibe. Granted, as someone who's not big into musicals, I'm not saying that's the reason I want this to become on a big screen, but I must admit, between the first song, which is a little versatility, and Where I Want to Be, which I believe ends Act 1, it does have good songs in it. The acting, whether it's Angelica Hale or it is, I can't remember this woman's name for the life of me, but the lead actress who plays Betty Boop, whose name is Jasmine Amy Rogers, they hold things down, and not only in terms of comedy but energy, and then you add in the nostalgia. Doesn't feel cheap. All I'm saying is this is about 2 hours and 15 minutes. There's usually a 15-minute intermission, and I think that if you have the chance to go see this, especially if you like Betty Boop, do so. Otherwise, fingers crossed, eventually they'll adapt this, since I feel like Betty Boop is long overdue for an on-screen, whether it's big screen or small screen remake.